Hi and welcome back to a new video. Nvidia recently announced some very interesting things on the GTC, for example the RTX Pro 6000. But this video is nothing about the GTC. It is about a podcast from last week from Gamestar Talk. Gamestar is one of the biggest media here in Germany around gaming and gaming tech. And they have this podcast which is called Gamestar Talk, which is available, for example, on Spotify, but also on YouTube. And in this episode, they had an Nvidia employee as a guest. And I can already tell you, watching this podcast, I had at least one mental stroke because some of the replies were so incredibly bad, it's amazing. And because they also discussed some of my content, I thought we definitely have to make a video about that. Thermal Grizzly Duronaut is our new high-end thermal paste and the successor of Cryonaut. It's even better performing, it is much easier to apply, it is cheaper, and it's much more durable. That's where the name comes from. Especially if you're now maybe considering to buy a new PC, then I would highly recommend that you're looking into this thermal paste. So let's continue with this video. The guest in this Gamestar Talk episode was Lars Weinand from Nvidia. He is Senior Technical Product Manager, and he has been at Nvidia for a very long time. I've also known him for a very long time, which makes this also a little bit difficult for me because I definitely have no personal issue with him. I also like him, but in this specific instance, I'm just looking at him as being Nvidia because I have to. Because as I said, some of those replies to the questions by Gamestar were pretty difficult. But I think we will just jump right into it. I also want to make clear that the original podcast was shot in German, and I tried to use AI to translate this into English. Sometimes it's not fully accurate, the AI's translation, so in some scenes I might want to add subtitles, or I will use the German version with subtitles depending on how accurate the AI translation was. I want to make sure that it's just accurate what I'm transporting in this video.
How satisfied are you with the launch?
The launch actually went very well.
If I just think back the previous 10 or 20 years of Nvidia launches, I'm not sure if this was the worst Nvidia launch I have seen so far. Just keep in mind, availability, pricing, like fake MSRP, PCIe issues, black screen issues, missing ROPs, missing physics, melting connectors. What did I forget? It doesn't sound like a good launch to me.
What I can say is that we have already produced and shipped significantly more than the previous generation, even at this point in time.
Obviously, we all know that this is bullshit. If you just compare the 40th and 50th gen launches, then at the same time frame, with RTX 40, we only had the 4090 and the 4080. Whereas now we have 5090, 5080, 5070 Ti, and 5070, so that's twice as many products. Obviously, they will be able to sell more, so that's just like fully misleading. Now this part is not specifically out of the podcast, but out of the same context with the same kind of advertisement by Nvidia, where they claim that 90% are using RTX features such as DLSS or ray tracing. Well, obviously with the Nvidia app now forcing this automatically in games, which it is doing, it's no surprise that this high amount of people are using RTX features. That is also tricky for me as a reviewer. Whenever I'm using the Nvidia app, which I am because I want to be with my results as close as possible to the consumer, it is always enabling, RTX or DLSS by default. It is like forcing it on me. So I have to specifically decide to disable it. So it's not like the user decided to run RT or DLSS. It's, Nvidia is automatically enabling it and then saying it's running on 90% of the systems. Okay.
Why is availability so difficult?
Well, it will come weekly. Shipments, depending on the manufacturer, of course also to Germany, throughout Europe, and also to the whole world. And many don't even come to the shops because they are pre-ordered. The cards go out immediately because they are all pre-ordered.
I don't get it. So the cards don't end up in the stores because they are pre-ordered. Pre-ordered by whom? And how can I even pre-order?
But if a product is very much in demand, that's just how it is. Friends of the market economy, then the price rises. And if someone now says, well, it wouldn't be available, you can see from the prices that unfortunately the demand is very high and everything that comes in. And as I said, many thousands of cards come in everywhere. Weekly, we are out of it. We can't do anything about it.
I'm trying to translate this. You're saying the prices are high because availability is bad and demand is high. But you're saying that availability is good.
Now, someone is asking in the chat, where can you pre-order? Never seen before. And apparently it's only the case in America. Why is it not like that in Germany? Or is it also possible in Germany?
It's also in Germany. Exactly how, I don't know right now. I have to say, I haven't ordered a graphics card myself for a long time. I'm at an advantage there.
So first he says the cards are not available because they are pre-ordered. Now it turns out he has no clue about how or if you can even pre-order anything. Then he also says that he's not aware of how you can specifically buy a card because he's in the advantage of being an Nvidia employee and he didn't have to buy a card himself for a long time in the retail market, which completely collides with what he's saying now.
But I can understand that people are upset about it. I also have friends who ping me and say, you can get a card cheaper or even at the normal price. I say, I have no influence on that because it all goes through the partners. We can't even for ourselves. If I buy a graphics card for myself, I have to buy it normally in the store because we don't have an employee program or anything like that, since we don't manufacture the cards ourselves, except for the founders, but then they are limited. And we would also have to make an effort to get one privately.
Turns out he would have to buy the card himself in normal retail stores, which is also an interesting statement again. If you think about that recently, like a month ago, there was a statement by another Nvidia employee which was leaked that RTX 50 cards are not available in the internal employee store because of bad availability.
We live in a free market economy and we can't dictate to the trade how much they should sell the card for.
Apparently, Nvidia also knows that MSRP or advertising the MSRP doesn't make any kind of sense because of the availability and how the MSRP in reality changes. Which then raises the question, why are you following this stupid launch schedule of like one day is an MSRP card that is not being sold for the MSRP in the end, and then one day later you have non-MSRP cards which are also going to be sold at the same price as the non-MSRP card. Like, this all doesn't make any kind of sense. Now he gets the question what he thinks about the entire scalping problem.
Regarding scalping itself, it's now an e-tail. When an e-tailer orders 10 cards and they give him 10 cards, then it's also up to the retailer to set the conditions and say, no, I only give out 1 card per person. If I release a bulk order, yes, here are 20 cards. That's up to the retailer themselves.
Of course, we all know stores where you could buy 10 or 20 graphics cards. That's just so far from reality, it's mind-blowing. But we continue already with the next question by Vera to Nvidia.
There is criticism regarding the native computing power. Some say that the ATX 5080 is actually more like a 5070. The 5070 is actually more like a 5060. And what is your take on that? Or Nvidia, what do you say about it?
The first question is, what is native performance? And where do I want to go with it?
This really hurts. I mean, of course, what is native performance? I will not torture you with the following minutes of DLSS propaganda, and they continue talking about why it is so difficult to continue the improvement, or why it's so difficult to continue improving the chips further in terms of performance.
And that's the problem we have, that we are reaching the limits with process technology, that we can no longer scale the chips. We officially say Moore's law is dead. Moore's law was from the CPU history. The performance doubles every 2 years and the price halves every 2 years for the transistors.
Again, a couple of questionable things. First of all, if we look back at the RTX 4090 launch, which is only 2.5 years ago, this was one of the biggest jumps in performance, I don't know, in the past 10 or 20 years. And then now, with the 5090, they suddenly claim that it's no longer possible to improve the native performance further. That is a simple result by Nvidia not being a manufacturer, but they rely on third-party companies such as TSMC. And if TSMC is only able to, I don't know, offer something in a year to improve the process node, for example, for RTX 60, then that's just the result that we're seeing right now. Same process node, obviously you can't get a huge improvement, but there will be a new process node, and then probably, I don't know, with RTX 60, we will again see a bigger jump in performance, probably also decreasing power consumption, and I guarantee Nvidia will then completely change what they're saying once again. Interesting is also how he quotes Moore's law wrong. The first one is correct, that every 2 years the transistor density doubles and thus typically the performance. But the second Moore's law says that every 4 years the cost doubles. And he says that every 2 years the cost is cut in half. That is just completely wrong. Now they continue talking about also, the amount of memory they put on the cards, and Gamestar is criticizing this. But yeah, the Nvidia replies are also not really good on this topic, but we're skipping this. We're jumping to the more interesting one.
Less amazing were reports about scorched power connections with the RTX 5090. What happened there?
In general, it's like this. All the cards we've received back so far were actually due to the fact that something was either wrong with the cable or the power supply. With the connectors in general, whether it's an 8-pin or the 12-volt high-power connector, there was already a newer version with Ada back then, which ensures that the connector is properly plugged in, and it is such that every card comes with an adapter cable, and we haven't had a single case where this happened with the original cable. Without pointing fingers too much, because we also make sure that we now have many users have also been addressed who reported this, and we also said, please send us your card, your cable, and the power supply. You will receive another card and the entire normal RMA process.
Quick cut at this point. Nvidia says they don't want to point fingers at somebody, but it's the cables and PSUs that are responsible for it. I'm also surprised that he's talking about many cases. I expected personally that they would downplay this to, like a single case, which turns out that it was not the case. I also find it interesting how he is arguing that it just doesn't happen, or so far didn't happen, with the Nvidia adapter, which is also, it's twisting reality a little bit. Because if you're the typical customer buying a 5090 or 5080, you're typically looking for latest gen technology. And it's very likely that you already use a native 12-volt high-power cable, so you don't have to use the adapter. Or even if you still have an older PSU, you might want to get one that hooks directly up to the PSU with like dual 8-pin and then gets transitioned into 12-volt high power. I mean, that's one of the reasons why a lot of people use like the cable mod adapter with the 40 series, because, big cards, close to the window, little space, you need 90-degree adapters. A lot of people simply, they just don't use the adapter. And obviously, if you don't use the adapter, it can't fail.
And it is sometimes the case that these cables are manufactured and produced differently. And on that, I would say logically we have no influence. For example, the one cable with which it all started, the manufacturer then said, for the 50 euro, please buy the latest cable of that and not the one we sold before.
This hurts. This is close to being fake news, It's first they're talking about different quality in cables and connectors, which, I mean, could be to a certain degree, but we all know that there is no safe call cable. Like any cable, any connector could be affected. And then he transitions into, you could almost call it victim blaming, because he says that the first case, which we also featured on this channel, the cable that Ivan was using, he says that Mod DIY clearly stated that it should not be used with RTX 50 Gen when the cards came out, which is that's just a pure lie. That's not what Mod DIY said. At the point when RTX 50 came out, they just had this cable validated with the 40th gen, but not the 50th gen. But at this time, they did not state that it should not be used with the 50th gen. Mod DIY also had this more detailed statement where they said there was an improved version to 675 watts over the original 600 watts, and they advise to use this one instead. At the same time though, Mod DIY also explains in the same article that 12-volt high power and 12-volt 2x6 are fully compatible because there was no change in the cable specification itself. So, I mean, how can the user use the wrong cable if there was not even a change in the cable specification?
Now, if a user goes and has the cable that plugs into it and says, I'm using it now because it fits and it worked before for my 4090, now I'll use it for the 5090. For one, it's hard for us to say what happened with the cable, how often it was used. In everyday testing, when we handle the cards and constantly use a new one, eventually the connectors also wear out a bit. That's a factor that normally doesn't occur with the end user. I've never had anything melt, probably neither have you.
Of course you can use the same cable for a 4090 and a 5090 because it is the same cable. You even say yourself at the beginning of the podcast that there was a change in the connector on the GPU side with Ada generation with the 4090, that it was easier to detect if the connector was fully plugged. But that change was on the card side, not on the cable side. So that just doesn't make any kind of sense. And also the fact that, the cable becomes loose or whatever when you plug it more often in and out, that is also something I had to listen to. I had to read in comments after making my video. But also this seems to be wrong. There was a great video by Jace2Cents recently about this topic where he plugged two cables 100 times and then he checked the delta between the pins. Turns out that the worst case was the brand new cable. There he saw a delta of 4 amps. But when he used the cable more often and plugs it more frequently, the situation just improved and it was just better the more often he plugged in the cable. I also want to test something similar shortly where I want to measure the contact resistance between both connector sides and see how it improves. But like currently, it seems more like the more often you use a cable, the more equal the current becomes between the cable and the connector. So that's completely the opposite of what Nvidia is claiming.
The thing is, you say, okay, I have a graphics card, I have a manufacturer, and I have a cable from a manufacturer that I connect together. And now the cable melts at the connector. Then you have to look at what the cause of that is. So it's probably not the graphics card.
It is quite difficult not to freak out listening to this nonsense. Nvidia just blaming the cable manufacturers and the PSU manufacturers and claiming that it's definitely not the card. Whereas we all know that the only reason why all of this is possible is because of the lazy electrical design on the 40th and the 50th gen, connecting all the 12 volt pins directly on the PCB and no load balancing. That is the only cause why anything of this is possible. The best part though is how he combines that we only see damage on the cable side, so it can't be the GPU side, right? It's always the cable that is to blame. If you did 5 minutes of research looking into how this connector is made and how this connector on the PCB is made, you would figure out that the cable side is usually PA66 plastic. Whereas, and I checked datasheets of Astron, Molex, Amphenol, they all list LCP plastic on this side on the PCB, which makes sense because it's also a part that has to be soldered, has to withstand higher temperatures, whereas the cable side obviously doesn't have to be soldered. And if you use two different plastics, and the LCP side on the PCB can withstand a much higher temperature, usually, I don't know, 50 to 80 degrees Celsius difference in melting point, it's obvious that the cable always melts first. It's physically impossible unless they use some really, I don't know, either they use for whatever reason LCP on the connector or like PA66 on here, which I think is never the case. It will always be that the cable melts first because it's the weaker plastic.
Exactly, but that's the one cable that explicitly should not be used for the 50 series. And of course, one point gets hot. But that can't happen with the middle cable because the pins are connected together in the connector. That means I can't even get to such a hot spot.
I don't get it. Like from a technical point of view, this explanation just makes no sense at all. The only reason why the hotspot is possible is because of your GPU design, of your design on the PCB, which was already problematic on the RTX 40 series, and you just repeated the same mistake on RTX 50. There's no excuse for that. Also claiming that the Nvidia adapter can't fail because all the cables are like connected or all the pins are connected in front. We have exactly the same thing on WireView. And for whatever reason, we also have cases of WireView melting. How do you explain that if it's exactly the same thing as here?
Without being judgmental, to really make a well-founded statement, I would also need several of these cables to test and compare so that I have statistical data, because in this case, it was really just one cable with one power supply.
Again, a very weak and also questionable statement, which is against everything that I learned as an engineer. You don't test until you like the results. That's not how it works. If you have one cable that is problematic, or one case that's problematic, you can't just say, okay, then I'm testing another 20, and if they're good, then everything is fine. No, you still have that one case where you have a problem. You can't untest that one. That's not how it works. And no matter what you try, no matter what you want to fix, on the cable or on the PSU side, it will not eliminate the problem because we know it is on the GPU side. And I can tell you all the cable makers, PSU vendors, they would all love to eliminate the problem, but they can't. They can't get rid of it because it's simply on the GPU side. It's like, it's like taking aspirin every single day because you have a headache instead of trying to find the reason and actually fix where it's coming from. And Nvidia, you would have to fix where it's coming from because you are the GPU maker. Well, not the maker, but you are making the design of this, the design guidelines. And you are the ones who are responsible to eliminate this. And it blows my mind how this company, which is like one of the biggest technology companies in the world, like one of the most advanced out there, how they can make such a simple mistake, repeat the simple mistake, and then still deny that it exists and blame everyone else. But to end this now, you know, this entire statement, it was embarrassing and like it was just wrong and weak on so many technical details. It blows my mind. And I'm also not sure, what did you expect? Obviously, if you mention me, if you mention those technical details that are just purely wrong, obviously I'm making a video about it. And you know, what's really awkward for me now is that in 1 or 2 days, I'm invited to see Nvidia in Munich. We'll probably see the same people there. That's going to be super awkward, but maybe not as awkward as the statement. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye bye.